Rama Raghavan, Voice of Architecture 2023.
Introduction. Can you please introduce yourself and share a bit about your background in architecture and writing? What inspired you to participate in the Sensory Architecture 2023 essay competition?
Hi everyone, my name is Rama Raghavan. I am an architect and writer based in Pune, India. So having practiced as an architect for a few years and then having taught as a professor in the academia, I began delving into the pursuit of trying to decode the deeper meanings of architecture and the built environment. This is how I found my passion for research and writing as the medium to express about the built and unbuilt space. I'm also a self-taught artist and a trained musician, and I strongly believe that multidisciplinary perspectives enrich design thinking and trigger critical discourses. Now working full-time as an architectural writer, I wish to explore these very intersections and connections in an attempt to broaden collective imagination and in some way help contribute in a more meaningful way to the profession. Now, the Sensory Architecture Essay Awards, organized by Archiol, presented an apt opportunity for me to explore the softer dimensions of architecture and the built environment. Having always been fascinated by the intangibles in architecture, I thought this was an ideal platform through which I could deepen my understanding about these subtler nuances of the built environment.
Essay overview. Could you provide a brief summary of your winning essay? What were the key concepts or arguments you explored? What motivated you to choose this particular topic for your essay?
So, in my essay, I set out with the basic premise that architecture can be equated or is in fact synonymous with a living bridge that holds the power to connect our, subjective perceptions, which are often shaped by our past experiences, to this objective reality that we perceive as is, and that this connection can be crafted to become more immersive and create even more meaningful experiences by employing the sensory design method. So the essay was an attempt to dig deeper into seeking out inspiring cases from around the world that helped achieve this innate ability to stir emotions in the inhabitant and ultimately create this quality of timelessness. Throughout the essay, this intersection of the intangible and amorphous sensory space and the more tangible tectonic space has been explored in various ways. For me, the main motivation behind selecting this underlying theme was that I have always been fascinated by how architecture, which is perceived often as a non-living or inanimate entity, can have such a profound influence on living entities that inhabit them. So in essence, I wanted to explore how in some cases architecture actually comes alive and strongly emotes and has stirring conversations with its surroundings and people.
Sensory architecture. How do you define sensory architecture? Why do you believe it is an important aspect of the built environment? How did you incorporate the sensory experience into your essay and highlight its significance in architecture design?
So there is this term that the French use, je ne sais quoi, which means I know not what. It is an almost indescribable quality, so to speak. So when a space produces this sort of ineffable quality where it is not just seen through the eyes but felt with the skin, smelt with the olfactory sense, heard and experienced in its entirety, to then naturally engulf and immerse the person moving through it, then it truly begins to embody the essence of sensory architecture or architecture designed for the senses. Now, since the topic was to delve into this indescribable quality that sensory architecture was about, it was quite challenging to be able to actually put into words describing this quality. And this could only be done if the writing itself imbibed a sensory nature and created that evocative experience for the reader. So rather than writing in a very technical way describing the cases mentioned, I tried to imagine myself moving through each space to describe the intangible qualities and the conversations that I was striking with those spaces, in my mental space. That I felt was important when writing about a topic as experiential as this.
Research and analysis. What research methods did you employ to gather information and support your arguments? Were there any significant challenges or interesting discoveries you encountered during your research process?
So, when I started out with my research process for the essay, I was very conscious about the kind of material that I wanted to go through. And I had this clarity that I wanted to expand on the case studies, but through solid backing of theories or concepts. For instance, phenomenology, a theory that speaks about philosophy of lived experience, was one of the concepts that I briefly wanted to explore in the essay. So I started reading books written by renowned architectural theorists who had explored phenomenology, like Martin Heidegger, Christian Neuberg-Schulz, and Juhani Pallasmaa. I was parallelly trying to research case studies that were impactful in demonstrating a strong connection with the senses. I then combined this knowledge of concepts and theories to expand on the case studies that I had selected to then probe deeper into the whys and hows of sensory architecture. So that was how I went about the research process.
Impact and application. In your opinion, how can a focus on sensory architecture positively impact individuals and communities?
So, as I have also mentioned in my essay, and as has been reiterated by people who have explored sensory architecture before, is that we as a society are becoming excessively ocular-centric, which means we lay importance to only what we can see or perceive through our eyes. Take for instance the augmented reality experiences that are becoming increasingly popular today, which are no doubt opening gateways to newer imagination, but if used frivolously, pose the risk of us losing the sense of our actual reality. And the feeling of, the feeling of being physically and emotionally connected with ourselves, with each other, with the larger community. We have the risk of losing that, and that can be very isolating and dystopian. That is why it is important that as architects, we are conscious of creating spaces that engage all our senses. Sensory architecture has that power to help us hold on to our actual realities and make our experiences more humane and help us connect in deeper ways with our inner selves and with the world around us to make us physically, mentally, and emotionally nurtured.
Future directions. Based on your research and insights, what do you envision as the future of sensory architecture? Are there any emerging trends or developments you find particularly exciting? How can architects and designers incorporate sensory considerations into their projects to create more immersive and meaningful experiences?
The future of sensory architecture lies in it effectively being able to converge with fields like cognitive neuroscience, behavioral psychology, humanities, and so on, to then be able to produce environments that are inclusive to all irrespective of abilities. For instance, if our environments were to be more tactile, that can be felt better with the skin, wouldn't that enable the visually impaired to navigate more seamlessly? To give you an example, a recent innovation in museum exhibit design in Mexico City's Natural History Museum brought forth prototypes of the actual exhibits of ecosystems that could then be touched, smelled, felt, and experienced by persons with visual impairments. And these kind of innovations are what make the experience more accessible and inclusive to all. So in a way, sensory architecture can help blur barriers and make way for a society that is more equitable and that is designed to elevate the experiences of each and every individual.
Personal reflection. How has participating in this competition and winning affected your perspective on sensory architecture and its importance in the field of architecture? Have you discovered any new passions or areas of interest through the process of researching and writing your essay?
So, participating in this competition gave me the opportunity to take a plunge into the world of sensory architecture in more meaningful ways. Through the research process, I stumbled upon hidden treasures that have been crafted in this area, which I then selected as inspiring cases for the essay. Through the process of writing the essay, I realized the relevance and pertinence of this area, and that as architectural writers, we must speak more about the need for designing for the senses to make this world more livable, more experiential, and more humane. And as a writer, I will try to be more conscious of including this aspect wherever possible to spread this awareness.
Advice for aspiring writers. What advice would you give to aspiring writers and researchers who are interested in exploring sensory architecture or entering similar competitions? Based on your experience, what are the key elements that make an essay stand out in a competition of this nature?
So, from my experience, my advice to writers who wish to dive into exploring sensory architecture would be to first tap into their personal experiences while approaching the topic, and then pose questions based on them. Coming from a space of personal connection helps establish that passion to then continue digging deeper to answer our questions around space and identity. This process helps bring a natural flow into the writing, making it very authentic and honest. Also, it is important to write in one's own voice, tonality, and language that comes naturally to one, without forcibly trying to impress the reader with forced jargon. This creates a disconnect in the reading experience since it wasn't written from a place of honesty and natural flow to begin with. Intense research, of course, in the area of writing is also extremely crucial to make sure that the arguments are well rounded and convincing, and that multiple perspectives and layers are addressed through the writing. So, I once again thank Archiol for this fantastic opportunity and recognition, and I wish all the best to all the future aspirants for this competition. Thank you very much.
For latest architecture competitions, visit Archiol Competitions.